No, he pulled for it.
They already started.
And in the back.
All right, we'd like to call to order the Board of Education regular meeting for Wednesday, August 15, 2012. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call, please.
Mrs. Capabianca. Here. Mr. Cabanero.
Here.
Mr. Kisco.
Here.
Mr. Marula.
Here.
Mr. Nargi.
Present.
Mr. Rivera.
Here.
Mr. Tebow.
Here.
Mr. Traub.
Here.
Mrs. Batchelder. Mrs. DeMonico. Present. Mr. Jocelyn.
Here.
Mrs. Pecco. Here. Mayor Bingham. Austin Kelson. Kevin Finn.
Here. Sorceress.
Sorceress?
Ramirez.
Not here.
Okay. School community session. The board invites members of the community to speak on topics to be addressed in the agenda or on other topics of interest. Individuals wishing to make any comments are requested to fill out the speaker sign-up sheet located at the speaker's table, including name, address, which also must be stated at the beginning of your comment. The board will not allow comments regarding specific staff members or personal grievances. Courtesy is expected in this limited public forum. The participating time will be limited to 3 minutes per person and 10 minutes overall to guarantee the efficient operation of the entire meeting. William Battle. Don't get comfy.
Oh, okay.
Come on up.
Thank you. I understand we have legislators here tonight, so I'm going to say this. This is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. I think many of you have heard me make mention of it. And first of all, I'm going to ask our legislators, when they're making policy for school systems here in Torrington or other places, to understand that there's an end point to your to the legislation you're proposing. Much of the things that are coming to us from the state, and this is something I'm saying as a parent, that we have to deal with, that our administrators have to attempt to put into practice, much of it is abject nonsense, and we have to be careful of it. Some of the things that we're asking the schools to do have nothing to do with the 3 R's. Schools cannot be the repositories of abject, constant parenting. You're not set up for it. It shouldn't be done. And as a matter of fact, I think it's a bad idea for schools to attempt to be parents. If you want to teach parenting in our school system, bring it back to the old home economics class in the senior year of the senior year, and have boys and girls both learn how to be parents when they leave. The idea of spending large amounts of resources that should go for things like Latin or the classic studies that we should have were better served with out of our budget. The budget limitations that we had this year, as I sat to listen to many of them, had nothing to do with education. They had a lot to do with school administration, but very little to do with kids actually learning. I think that's something we should say to the state. I'm asking us legislators that are here today, in particular Ms. Cook, because she works me to death. So therefore I can say whatever I want about that, climbing hills at my age in the hot sun. So therefore I'm going to tell her, be very cognizant when you're doing legislation for the school systems, that what it really means. The schools are here to teach our children how to read, write, and do their arithmetic. All due respect to Mr. Monaco, I will handle my son's diversity studies at home. That is my job. So the bottom line is, no matter how we want to take all of these considerations, remember, parenting is done at home. We're beginning to do that in Torrington locally. Many of our administrators, including the superintendent, has come to our Friday meetings. We hope to invite Mr. Gray, as soon as he's on board, to come to one of our parenting meetings. The idea that we must get back to the point that parenting is done at home, and the relationship between the school system and children should be one of education and education only. We've gotten too far away from it. The last 40 years has been the age of school reform, and as the man said, in a nation at risk. It began with reform. The reforms that you're attempting to impose on it are ruining our school systems. And I'm saying it as a parent. The other thing I want you to know, I'm not the only parent that understands this. Parents talk. And many of the school teachers who will not come out and tell you, will tell you off the record that they feel the biggest problem that we're having in our school systems is the breakdown of the family. It has nothing to do with gaps and all the rest of those things. And just on a humorous note, I guess that the new ideas of what the children are going to eat in school is a very high priority. It's kind of funny. It's interesting. My son and his friends are having great sport at it. If you really think they're going to give up French fries for carrot sticks, very well. Give it a shot. You're going to waste a lot of money. The only thing we could do, if we had farms now, and we had dumpsters, the stuff that would be put in the dumpsters that the kids are supposed to be eating, we could really sell it cheap if we had pig farms and things around, because we don't. But they're not going to do it. You can try to substitute pizza with with salads if you want to. But that's not the function of the school, to tell my kid what to eat. I'll handle that. I'm a parent. I'm an engaged parent. I can do those things. The other thing that I'm going to ask you to look at, legislators at least, the new school administrators in Hartford, I know some of them. The things that they're putting into place, we talked about 10 years ago. They are designed for large municipal cities with larger populations than we have. They are not appropriate for Torrington at all, and we should not be burdened by them. Our DERG is different from Hartford, New Haven, certainly Bridgeport and the others. I said that to our past superintendent, and I believe I even mentioned it in passing to a new superintendent. This is Torrington. The families have not died here. The fact that most of the legislation coming down now is giving us the impression you no longer trust parents. Imagine the idea of having 0 to 3 Head Start, a time when most kids and toddlers in any kind of family would be bonding with their families, extended and local, no matter what. The idea, and one of the things I really want to find out, who are the pediatric psychologists who are signing off on these things? I hope they're not coming from UConn. This is rubbish. It's dangerous. It probably goes against all types of child work. The superintendent and I have had conversations, so I know she told me that she remembers Piaget from the old days. So maybe that's a funny thing. Everybody laughs when we talk about Piaget. He was the master child psychologist of the world. And now we find out that we have different processes with which to deal with children, but there are no studies to verify it. For God's sakes, let's cut it out. Let's cut it out. We are aware, we parents in Torrington are aware of it.
Hold over. I'm sorry, 3-minute time limit.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
For the record, thank you, Mr. Battle, and I will say I agree pretty much with this assessment of the roles of the school versus the roles of parents.
I think many of us will agree with that. Okay, approval of the agenda.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to add agenda item under information sharing number 9, update on broadcasting of Board of Ed meetings live.
Do we have a second? Second on Mr. Cavanero. Any opposition? All those in favor? Opposed? Seeing none? Okay, approval of the agenda with the amendment of number 9 in the live broadcast.
Comment?
I'm sorry.
When we get to the end, items for the upcoming agenda, oversight should be SIGHT.
Okay.
And that will appear in the minutes of last month's meeting too, where it was also under that.
Okay. All those in favor of, as noted, adding number 9 to informational sharing and correcting number 11.4 of oversight panel, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Our first item of action, we'd like to introduce the Republican Party candidate to replace Mr. Oliver. We have Mr. Carl Brady, educated at Wake Forest and Boston University. He is currently the district executive for the Boy Scouts of America, the Connecticut Rivers Council, Northwest Hills District. Sorry, I put you on the wrong side of the state. Would you like to come up to the microphone, Mr. Brady?
You want to put up here or over there?
No, right there's fine. We have to, we'd like to get a motion to accept Mr. Brady as a member. Mr. Debo made the motion. Do we have a second? Mr. Cavanera? Do we have any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of adding Mr. Brady to our board? Opposed? Mr. Brady, welcome.
Thank you.
Condolences. We're now going to call on Mr. Rivera to swear Mr. Brady in so he can participate in the balance of our meeting.
Do you, Carl Brady, solemnly swear that you will faithfully and impartially discharge according to law the duties incumbent upon you as a member of the Board of Education for the City of Torrington to the best of your ability, so help you God?
I do.
In my haste, I skipped number 4. Mr. Brady, you'll have to abstain.
Okay.
Approval of the meeting minutes for the Board of Education of July 18, 2012. I have a motion. Mrs. Holland, a second by Mr. Thibault. Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Mr. Kisco? Are you in or out?
I'm in.
He's in. All right. Abstentions, Mr. Rivero and Mr. Brady. Okay. Informational sharing session. We've invited our local legislators, I guess representatives and senators for the state, to address our, it's 458, correct? House Bill 458 was the law, well, 116, all right. If you guys would like to join us at the table. Unfortunately, we only have 2 chairs. I'll have to ask Kevin to bring one. We need my homework. Is this a quiz?
There will be a test later.
And we're actually going to appear very organized over at this table as compared to the General Assembly because we're each going to pick a part of our topic tonight. Does that work in the presentation?
Well, the general reason for the board asking for your attendance is the legislation came in late, it was voted on. We're not necessarily, we've attended several conferences for explanation of the law and the bill as it was passed. And we have gone to CAPS, we've gone to Ed Connection, and there's not a real solid, let's say, understanding of how this is going to impact the Torrington and the neighboring school districts. You know, our main focus obviously is Torrington. So we've asked for you guys to come and basically explain it to us. And there's 3 issues that were raised by members of the board that are highlighted. We might have board members ask questions outside that. If you're comfortable answering it, that would be great. If you're not, you would like to get back to us with that information, that would also be wonderful. So if you broke it up, if you want to...
I would like to start by saying that we were given 3 agenda items.
Right.
And we were not given the educational reform bill, which is a whole entity in itself. And you might want to devote an special evening to it. as opposed, but these issues, ECS, magnet schools, and addition, those are the items that we came here to prepare to speak on, not the Omnibus Education Reform Act.
I just wanted to, you may
Thank
get
you.
questions outside of that realm that, as I said, if you get one and you're not prepared to answer it and you'd like to get back to us, we don't want you to feel that you're on the spot to regurgitate an answer right here. That would be great if you would honor us with that answer.
Now, I emailed you all the copy of the last 458. Did you all receive that?
When was that?
Yes, I emailed, we did that in June.
Yeah, a while
Okay,
ago, yes.
okay, no, it hasn't changed since then, so I just
Okay.
want, so, okay.
That's fine, yeah. Just want to make sure it wasn't like today. 'Cause I didn't-
I want to start with this.
You want to start? So Roberta's going to start
Well,
with.
you were going to go over your chart, and then I'll go into,
You have this pack in front of you first, and I think some of what Kevin attached in his packet will overlap. Keep one for yourself. They're right there. Yeah. Will overlap some of that, but this is just a kind of a breakdown as to the state aid and what Torrington has gotten over the past 5 years to date, and it does not have the 2013 on this chart. We were finalizing everything when this chart was flowed. 2013, as you all know, we in Torrington have received almost another $500,000 in ECS funding additional on top of what we have received in 2012, which in the big scheme of things was a nice amount of money, given the fact that they were trying to spread the wealth, if you will, statewide. So we did benefit very well from that. And so this just, at the top, it gives you the breakdown as to what the dollars go for and how they're broken down into every year. And below, it just gives you the graph chart as to how it's gone up or down and its existence to date. Let me tell what else. We'll do this and I'll tell what else is in there.
you know, I think the important thing when you look at the ECS numbers is that there was a commitment from both the governor and the legislature that we were, even though we were facing hard times, that we were going to maintain aid to education. We are very cognizant of the fact that is when you flat fund ECS dollars or any kind of school aid when costs are going up, in a sense you could look at it as a decrease in terms of what your budget is. But the reality is that there was no there, and we really did what we could to ensure that we maintain municipal aid and aid to education. Now, the question I was asked specifically was about ECS and proposed changes to the formula. And what I wanted to bring to you is the information on the Educational Cost Sharing Task Force that has now been meeting for the last year. I think they've met about 14 times thus far. It's very interesting. The task force was established by the legislature and the governor to look at how we could make ECS more equitable. Obviously, there's a lot of complaints. You know, everyone feels that the formula is not working for them. We hear from all of our towns. If you're from Bridgeport, you say it's New Haven that gets more. If you're from Hartford, you say the formula is not right, and Bridgeport gets more. So it's from everyone's different perspective, and as someone who represents 6 different towns, I can tell you all of my towns have a different position on, you know, what they think their fair share is. But the bottom line is that the equalized education cost share that was established as a result of a court decision back in 1977 to equalize education in Connecticut has been tweaked or played with over the years. And we're now at a point of saying we really need to not do any more tweaking of the formula, but we really need to maybe start at the beginning and looking at the formula. And I think that's what the task force is started out trying to do. Now, it's interesting, I went and looked at some of the minutes of their meetings, and what has happened when I looked at the minutes of the meeting and the discussions, that it went from a discussion on how you do a formula for ECS to the whole issue of education funding. And that was, all of a sudden, there was a whole group pushing on special education funding, and then there was another groups that are looking at, from magnet schools to charter schools to our BOAG and schools and our ag science schools and how they're funded, which is different than the magnet schools. And there is a push from our public ag science schools to be treated, they want to be treated as magnet schools in terms of how the state funds them. So those are the challenges before the group. But I wanted to find out for you how you could impact the process, how you could have your voices heard. Now, the two chairs of, there's co-chairs of the ECS committee, and that's Senator Andrea Stillman, who is the Senator Chair of the Education Committee, and Benjamin Barnes, who is the Secretary of the Office of Policy and Management. So they're co-chairing it. I also went and looked at who the members are, and this might be helpful for some of you. For instance, the state boards of education are part and represented on the ECS formula. So as a board of education, you may want to touch base and speak to your representatives at the state board. The Association of Public School Superintendents also have a representative on it, the Connecticut Association of Education. So there's about 10, 12 people who are serving on this board that you may want to write a letter. I would think if you have strong feelings about the formula and how it is structured and ideas, then I would recommend you might draft something. I will try to find out. I know they just had a hearing in Bridgeport back in July. I was trying to find out when another hearing would be, because I did see that some schools did attend and submitted testimony. So that would be my recommendation for you to put Torrington, express your concerns. This is not going to be something that is going to be fixed overnight, because until we're in a position where we can really increase funding to education in Connecticut, because we're not going to hurt anybody. We're not going to, I don't think there would be the will to give one system something at the expense of someone else. So it really requires then having a larger pot of money to fund education in Connecticut. And that being said, that's going to be the time when we really should have something new in place that addresses everyone's concern. So I wanted to share that with you. I wanted to let you know that I know that's an issue here on the distribution, that there is a process in place, and now would be a perfect time to make your voices heard. My understanding is their final report will be given this fall in preparation for the start of the new legislative session. January 1.
January 1.
I did see one report where it said they were asking them to get it in October, but, so, anyway, that's what I have to report on that. And if you have more questions, I'd be glad to.
Can we leave this here? Do you guys need it that close to us, or will you hear all of us?
I think it's only.
It would be more for the recording. Can you hear them well enough with the mic pushed away?
Is this good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
We have a few questions for you, if that's all right.
Well, I think Kevin wanted to say something else on ECS before, if you guys want to indulge him before we answer questions.
Yeah, I'm not sure how how familiar everybody is with ECS. I mean, that's an acronym that we talk about, but does everybody understand the historical perspective on what is ECS? How do we get an ECS formula? And what actually comprises the formula itself? And I'm just going to spend a minute to kind of give you background on that. Barnaby Horton was a resident of the town of Canton back in 1974, and he felt that the way the state was funding education at a flat fee of $250 per pupil just wasn't cutting it, because what was happening is if you lived in a wealthy community, then the taxpayers said, well, that's not enough money for education, so we're going to give more so our students have a great quality education. And he felt that was disadvantageous to the poorer communities. So he filed a lawsuit against Governor Meskel. And because of that lawsuit, the state came up with this guaranteed tax base system, and that evolved later on into what is now in 1987-88 what Roberta said as the ECS. And ECS basically takes your students, the number of students that you have, and they're weighted based on a need. So say if everybody averages 50, and then you have students that are in poverty or English as a second language or special ed, and those students may be weighted at a 70 or 80 or a 90. It'd be a heavier number. And then you take that number and you multiply it by a number that the state has determined you need to provide a quality education. That's called the foundation. So you take those two numbers and you multiply them. And then you multiply it by a percentage of the town's wealth. And there's a whole stream of formulas that make up how you reach the town's wealth. So those basically three numbers is how you get an ECS formula. So in 2009-2010 fiscal year, the state, partnering with our municipalities and federal government, spent $9.9 billion in education in that 1 year alone. So it is a lot of money that goes into the educational field. However, the municipalities and the cities and towns pay the bulk of that. And in 2009, the state decided that we got some federal stimulus dollars. And we were looking at a fiscal deficit at the state level. So we decided, well, we're going to use that money and we're going to plunk that into the ECS formula. So it saved the state 14%. And we didn't have to pay anymore. But now, as you know, those monies dried up and they're not there. So that's why we've flat funded ECS since 2009. Nobody has taken a decrease. Michelle was right. Every town got a number, and it's been that number. And Torrington's been at $23,933,343 since 2009. And you are going up to, as Michelle said, $24,402,168 in fiscal year 13. But the problem is that we don't have a formula anymore. We talk about the ECS formula. What it is, it's a statutory, by municipality, appropriation. So you're taking the 166 educational communities and saying, you're getting this, you're getting this, you're getting this. It happens, it's easy because it's flat funded. Because of inflation and the changes in the communities and the number of students, the type of students, we would need an additional $724 million if we were to fully fund the ECS grant formula. And I don't see that coming. Torrington is very lucky to receive the additional monies for next year. I don't see, I want to believe that there'll be a change to an ECS formula that everybody will agree to, but there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. And I've seen it time and time again in the legislature. As soon as the ECS runs come out, everybody grabs their sheets and they look to see where their towns are. And if their towns take a loss, they vote no until their towns are, or they get into conversations until their towns are either equal or they're given more money. And that's just the nature of the beast in the legislature. Nobody's going to approve a reduction, a stark reduction in education dollars to their community. Even though it may be the best thing for the state, I don't see that happening unless we take it out of the onus of the legislature and put it somewhere. I have a hard time believing that's going to pass. One of the things that I want to talk about that changed in the new bill that Mr. Traub brought up was the school construction. And Torrington's reimbursement rate for alterations has increased if you want to do an alteration to your school building. is at a reimbursement rate of 74.64%, a renovation, I should say alteration, a renovation. And the reason why it went up, new construction reimbursement is 64.64%. The reason why the renovation percentage is higher is because they're hoping to keep existing structure buildings in use. And that you're going to do, you need to do more than just enhancement of a painting or a little side wing. They want total renovation. So they're making things that were once ineligible for an alteration, now eligible under a renovation scenario. And you go through the normal process, work with your Torrington delegation, your superintendent of schools, and the state to submit the process for reimbursement.
There's been a change in the past couple of years, though, that with the merger of a bunch of different departments and trying to shrink the size of government, school construction has been relocated out of the State Board of Ed, and it is now in the Department of Construction Services. There was a hearing today, and they are starting the list for the priorities of, construction priorities and who wants to get on that list. That list will have to be finalized in January so it can go in front of the committees of Cognizance when the next term starts up. So as Kevin was saying, we need to get whatever you all have in mind. If you have something in mind, we need it as soon as possible since their hearings are already started. So I don't know if that helps you all, and I know that Cheryl, we sat and talked for a couple of hours today about things that are in the works, and you had mentioned something about a child care magnet, and I know that this leads us to our next topic, and so if we can roll to that and then take questions, that would be very helpful. I called after we left to specifically ask that question about preschool or early childhood or early readiness facilities in magnet type. There's a moratorium on magnet school construction. And there's no additional money allocated for magnet schools right now because we had in the education committee pushed such an emphasis on public schools, the VOAGs and the techs, that there's really not a ton of money obviously to go around. So the conversation of the specific of early childhood would not be something that we could get to move. We would have to look more school construction. Right, yeah. I don't know if that answers all of your questions, but I think that would probably help those three topics of which you all had requested information on specifically.
I whispered to Michelle, just Roberta said so you didn't hear it. I said that's only for non-chef towns, which for Torrington is not. But in case you heard through your colleagues out in the field, well, how come they're getting it? They may be a chef community, and that was because, as a result of a lawsuit, Chef versus O'Neill, for the integration of schools. So there were 18 communities that were identified that are chef towns, and there are monies available for them, but not for non-chef.
Right. So we hope that answered some of your questions, and we'd be happy to try to answer some of your other questions.
All right, we'll start over here on our right.
Yeah, it's not, first of all, thank you very much for showing up. We all know it's a busy time for politicians, and taking time out of your schedule is much appreciated and help us sort through a lot of this information. My question is, I mean, listening to you speak to the realities of what the ECS is and what it has to be, I feel like it's almost pointless to ask this. One of the reasons, I was one of the people who requested an ECS overview, because I've had this idea for a while, and I think it's clearly obvious to you three and to the board members that in towns like Torrington, I was looking specifically to connect, seeing how if there was somebody who could put an index specifically in the ECS formula that calibrated, that was tied to affordable and low-income housing and the kinds of kids and troubled kids, disabled kids, kids who need special services that generated, because towns that do have an excess of affordable housing like Torrington, we do get a far higher, and as we all know, the ECS formula does not cover the needs. So the more we provide opportunities and enable larger and larger numbers of children with special needs come into this town, the more the downward spiral accelerates to the point where towns like Torrington, Garyville, and as and up and down the Rust Belt of Western Connecticut, we are now cutting back from core curriculum programs to feed special ed populations. So my thinking was, and what you say, Senator Whitcomb, yeah, I absolutely get that. But my thinking was, in terms of fairness, where ECS first began as an attempt to make it to level the playing field across Connecticut, very progressive piece of legislation, and certainly, it has benefited, and it was a remarkable piece of legislation in its time, and times have changed. Was that if there was an index whereby you could say, township municipalities like Torrington that provided, above the state required low-income housing would get an extra bump in their ECS, and in order to net it out, you would take it away from those towns that are not providing, that are under, that are providing less than they're supposed to be providing by the same affordable housing index, So, I have no idea politically if that could fly, but that would certainly at least begin to address some of those problems.
Well, I think, Paul, and that's what I was getting at before, in terms of ECS, that you're not going to see a change in the formula until where the state is at a position to increase funding across the board. We are not going to, I cannot see us, as Kevin pointed out, doing anything that wouldn't hold people harmless. The question is, how do you determine wealth, a wealth factor? And that may be what you need to pose to the ECS committee. For instance, when they used to do poverty indexes, I believe they used to do it based on free and reduced lunch. And now it's based on Title I funding, am I? Okay, so now the focus has changed. But you make an excellent point about Torrington exceeding the percentage of required affordable, statutory number. I think it's 10%. Torrington's probably, what are you saying, it's like 19 or something? It's high.
I don't know. I'm
about
planning and zoning,
Yeah.
and one of the reasons was
Yes,
that,
no, it's higher. Winstead's high.
Winstead
Winstead meets that criteria. Torrington meets that criteria. But that being said, you are a regional center of a county, and you have transportation, and you have more jobs here. And so it's logical that people could move here because there's greater opportunity than there is, in the other towns that I represent. There aren't that many jobs, or even an opportunity for jobs. So people aren't going to be moving their families there. So that is a very important question and criteria to be putting forward. And that's what the other cities that I mentioned before, where a Bridgeport or a New Haven or Hartford, Waterbury, Willimantic, those are some of the poorest communities in our state. And the need is tremendous. And I know we feel the need is tremendous here, but let me tell you, you can't even, and Willimantic is, I think, one of the second, next to Bridgeport's poorest towns in the state. So the needs are so tremendous there. And English is a second language. Schools dealing with that, the challenges that presents for communities, getting our students school ready, coming to the school. I think Torrington actually, I was complimenting Mr. Kevin Yarrow yesterday, because I think actually Torrington's doing a very good job on the early childhood. So you should be congratulated for that, from what I've seen personally. So, but that being said, that's the challenge, Paul. The challenge is we need more money for education, and before you're going to see wholesale changes, and we're going to hold towns harmless. We're not taking away from a town, and the need is too great. And as we've looked at this, it's been level funded, which really means that we haven't kept pace with inflation.
I would suggest though, like we had talked earlier about getting in touch with the people that are on the ACS task force. I mean, you can do it through us. I'm more than willing, I sit on the education committee anyway, you know, I'm more than willing to pass around your information, your suggestions to those people. And if you find it easier to generate it through myself or what have you, I'd be you know, more than happy to help pass your suggestions along. It's the only way that people are gonna find out is from people that are on the ground, so.
You'll pardon me, but I'm a bit shocked that we are so drastically underfunding ECS already. Your number of $764 million needed just to bring it up to current level funding is simply staggering. I will need some time to digest and look at this and see exactly what impact the new legislation and the new mandates being pushed down from the state are going to have on our budget, because I'm not sure whether an additional $500,000, although desperately needed, after taking a $750,000 cut from the city itself, on top of new mandates, is even going to make a dent or be seen. I would love to see the state turn around and stop pushing the mandates down to the individual towns. Let the towns decide what they need, instead of having the state say, well, this is what we need in Hartford, so you need it in Torrington. That's not the case. But I'm not sure whether at this point, given such a horribly underfunded program and design of the system, that there's much hope of moving forward at this point, other than just taking it and dealing with it as best we can.
I would recommend that you work through CABE, Connecticut Association Board of Education.
Unfortunately, it's one of the programs the board does not belong to. We had to cut funding for that just so we could make up funding for other programs.
Or reach out to your colleagues that are on other boards and say, and I think, I shared this with a few earlier, that when we go back into session in January, it would not be that difficult to push back some of the deadlines on some of the mechanisms, the requirements in the Bill 458 that, so I don't know what the public act number is now, but maybe not substantive changes of the law, but deadlines certainly, as people reach out and communicate to their legislators that we can't do it by that amount of time. We don't have the money, we don't have the resources and the manpower, and it needs to be studied a little bit longer. And I think that's certainly a doable objective to push some of these due dates out.
And sitting on the education committee, and I think the only one sitting on the education committee that represents Torrington, there is also another component to funding and mandates that I don't necessarily know if people understand, is we also receive billions in federal dollars. And with that dollar amount comes certain requirements as well. So if we're not in compliance, we either have to pay fines or we don't get the dollars. So that's where some of the pushes, and I'm not saying specifically some of, all of the stuff in the education bill, but in every arena when it comes to funding from the state and the feds, it is about, there's criteria.
They want something and they'll give you money for doing it.
Well, no, there's guidelines of which you have to adhere to be able to qualify. It's grants and applications and things like that. And it's very difficult because, and in a very, cavalier type of a way, everybody wants to blame the state, but at the same time, it's very difficult to continue to ask us for money. It's a very narrow balancing act. And you, I believe, just said it yourself. The town cut you
$750,000.
a ton of money.
Yes.
And so, and it's very difficult for us to be able to say to you, well, we can make that up. It's just...
No, the state doesn't have the money. We
Correct.
don't have the money. And that becomes my point is,
Right.
When does it get to the ability for us to pull back on the mandates to be able to say, this is the pool of money we have to work with? If we have, in this case, $67 million worth of a budget to work with, that's it. You can't put any more mandates, because every time we have to go out and do something new, there's no money to do it.
But not everything new costs.
Not everything new costs.
A lot
of old programs still cost that are in place.
Is there specifics that you have? I mean, I'd be happy to look into them if there's mandates that you know off the top of your head that you feel are a burden to Torrington that, as Kevin had
Well,
said,
I
I
definitely like to
have,
see the, I believe they're called IEPs and IEDs that are part of special education plans. Those are actually a secondary mandated group, and I'd rather see those broken out from school budgets, as most of that has to do with state mandates,
that's federal,
federal mandates.
but that would have.
And then, again, the challenge becomes, that's becoming an ever-increasing size of our budget, and it would be better if that was broken out. If that's the federal dollars that are coming in, that we have to equal up to those mandates, I'd rather see those programs as a federally funded program and listed that way as part of a school budget, not just lumped in and say, well, here's $67 million of your budget, well, we need an additional $1 million for these people. Well, it doesn't benefit the students of Torrington. It benefits this group under this mandate, where the federal government will give you, let's say, it's $1 million, they'll give you $500,000 for that, the state will give you an additional $100,000, you're left to make up $300,000 or $400,000. And again, there's lots of different pieces of this that over the last couple of years, and particularly this budget season, with meeting after meeting after meeting, and trying to figure out where we can cut, how we can cut, look at the possibility of cutting programs such as music and sports and other activities. It's becoming so much that we're just at a standstill for where to go next.
Well, I think as far as your budgetary request, that wouldn't be our mandate the way you do. That would have to be, you need to look to your left, I think, and talk to Mr. Monaco over there. And I don't know if it's feasible for your Board of Education to divide your dollars allocated by what criteria they come under from the federal government or the state government. I mean, there is an intertwining mix between the IEPs and how those dollars are broken up, and some does come from the state and some does come from the federal government, but it goes back to what I had said a few minutes ago about how we have to remain in compliance with things that have to, I mean, don't get me wrong, we don't sit up in the education committee and jump up and down about some of the things that we have to do either. But it is clearly all for the better of that child that we're responsible for educating.
Mr. Dargy?
When Roberta talked about Torrington being the hub of northwestern Connecticut, she brought the attention that as the hub, we are also the center for jobs. Well, that was terrific in a time when Torrington was an industrial center and there were private sector jobs, private sector growth in the region. But if you start talking about Torrington in the last 5 years, or maybe even longer, what we've really become is not an opportunity for jobs, but a place where people find a designation for government services. So how do you put the changing of an entire environment, political, economic environment, which is so drastically changed over the last several years, from an industrial-based center for opportunity for people to come here to look for work, for now having a community where everyone who's coming here in the last 5 years, the majority of people, are coming here for the benefits of government services, be it medical services, special ed services, things of that nature. So does the state, it doesn't seem like the state has got a grasp of the dynamics of Torrington anyway, and that's what we're concerned with at this board level, of what's actually transpiring. And when you think in terms of the fact that Torrington has had flat funding for the last several years, it kind of tells me that formula has no intellectual strength or basis to decipher whether or not it's servicing the community correctly. It's just saying it's a flat funded revenue stream, but we're not going to take into consideration the drastic change in what's transpired in this community over the last several years. So when will that be when at the state level will you start changing the formula so as to just say, we're not going to hurt anyone, but we're not going to really think as far as what the actual needs of communities are, and create a real formula which can, we have a large, vast group of highly paid administrators, educators at the local, state level, yet where is that benefiting towns like Torrington to actually figure out, with the changing demographics, the changing communities, how do they get a fair sum of money to those communities as they're changing? I'm not being negative, I think I'm just pointing out
There's
observations.
the wealth factor that is factored in.
It can't be factored in because it's flat funded, and I know that Torrington has changed drastically in the last several years.
And-
I feel it, I see it, we know it, we can see based on test scores, based on behavioral patterns in our community, what's transpiring, the increase in second language students in our community, it's all drastically changed. But yet, what we seek from the state, one of the things we seek most from the state is dollars, and yet over the last 5 years or 4 years, it's been flat funded. So
Go ahead.
You know, the ECS has been flat funded, and the funding that's come to Torrington is flat funded, but there clearly is a recognition on needs in our towns. And should we be doing more to meet some of those needs? Yes. Are we trying? Yes. I see in Torrington, you have school-based health clinics, you have family resource centers, all addressing the challenges that you have mentioned that take into account your changing population. English as a second language. Is it doing everything that it could be doing in terms statewide? Should we be doing more? It would be wonderful to do more, and we've added more statewide this year. But I do think, I don't know what the demographics are in terms of employment in Torrington versus where we were 5 years ago and what the jobs are. That's a whole nother conversation, because I do think there's changes, and I do see positive change happening here in Torrington with new companies emerging. But that's a whole nother evening to have a conversation. Though it tells you why our students need to be educated, because the jobs that are being created in Torrington are high-skilled jobs. There's not as many of them in the factories as we used to have, but the jobs that are coming to Torrington today are good jobs, but they require a skilled and educated workforce. And that's why it's so important that we have a strong public education system.
And Mr. Nardi, you had said that you don't believe, or you feel that it's not, our needs are not being addressed in Torrington, or from Torrington to the state. And I would beg to differ that they are clearly being addressed. We fight very hard to make sure that Torrington is put on the map. And we take the Even Start program. We are one of 4, well, 3 now, towns in the whole state of Connecticut that get that money. And so it's money that is not necessarily addressed in your ECS formula, and it's not money that you might see on the front page of that graph. But we do fare very well with the little clumps of dollars that do trickle down from the state. And those are great programs. And those programs are doing far more than what any dollar amount can show. Because what we're doing with that program specifically is taking children or young adults that have now become parents and teaching them how to be and helping them to be good parents and get their education and help them get a job. So those are the things that are win-wins in my book. And you can't see the amount that is on paper, but you can see that when you know that we've helped those parents raise a good child and give back to the community. So it's very difficult, but yes, we do know, and we do our darndest to make sure that they know, so.
Just the last point on this subject, though, is when you have a formula which isn't interactive on a yearly basis with the changing times of a community, I think it's unfair to that community. I think it's unfair if that's the way this formula has worked over the last several years for the entire state, not just Torrington. But it just goes year after year out of inertia that you're going to give each of these communities the same percentage dollar amount.
That's not how it works, because if that's how it worked, we wouldn't end up with an extra 500,000 this year.
Well, for the last, we can go back.
We've seen gradual changes, not insurmountable changes, but we have seen gradual things, and it is addressed every year.
But our percentage has decreased. Torrington has actually had a decrease in percentage of our entire budget year over year.
But not from us.
ECS is definitely
Because,
decreased.
yeah,
His
that's what
point
I'm
is,
saying,
if you
right.
look at our overall budget,
Right,
because of
right.
the flat funding, Kevin had pointed it out
Right.
earlier also, that it's a smaller percentage of our total budget.
Right.
Right.
So it's a decrease, we're not maintaining because
But it's not.
it's flat funding.
You know, I don't mean to be gloom and doom here, but,
We are, go ahead.
The cities and towns are in the second tier as far as the state priorities go. We're going to take care of ourselves first, and I hate to say it like that. That's the truth when it's budget time. We have taxed everything that is taxable at the state level. We can't keep up. We cannot keep up. That's why when we had that, I said earlier, we froze it because we had that money and then the money wasn't there. So now we were doing individually in towns by appropriation, not by any formula, but by appropriation. We're going to be in a world of hurt next year, I think. We're doing what we can to continue the school construction costs because there's no way communities can afford to put out the millions and millions and millions of dollars for school construction, especially those communities that are growing and they have no place for these kids to go. The kids are being taught out in hallways, and it's not conducive to a quality education. So we try to prioritize as best we can as the dollars that are going out there. That's happening all over, especially in election years. You hear people talking about entitlements and safety nets and, don't do away with this, don't cut that, but there's only so much money. And how do you make sure that that money's doled out appropriately to the best that you can? And I feel bad that the money for education has been flat funded. In essence, basically, it's a decrease because your costs are going up and we're not giving you our share. I wish the state could fund at least 50% the cost of education, but we're down to 36%. And it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. That's the reality of our times at the state level.
Mr. Kisco.
And you're right, Mr. Whitcomb, about taxing everything. And we always sell it on the basis of the benefit to education. The lottery, 50 years ago, was supposed to be a huge boon to education. The income tax, a huge boon to education. The casino money, which is mentioned here on a separate line, a huge boon to education, but then it gets grabbed and put into the general fund. Question though, flat funding through the ACS, okay, or ECS. But that doesn't mean that every town, every city gets the same amount that it did, or proportionally the same amount that it did, right? Because the state doles out money to some schools, to some districts, and for some purposes that essentially treat the towns unfairly. Isn't that correct?
No, I think that all the towns, there might have been a few that Torrington got the additional monies, but if I don't have a list, the run of all the communities, pretty much everybody's been level funded for the past 3 years, from what they had in ECS.
ECS,
Right.
except there are special programs that apply only to certain towns based on social engineering criteria.
But that would be grant-based.
Yeah, But it's still state money that could be spent through the ECS if the state didn't spend it, didn't allocate it through grants, which it determines.
But
Sometimes
those are
outside the
federal dollars. Those are not
legislators.
state dollars. Those are federal grants.
But doesn't the state fund some programs inequitably among the cities and towns? Aren't there special programs for some of our cities, for instance?
You're getting